Hey everyone, Nigel and Luke here, and welcome to Crime Zone. Though many businesses have been suffering for the past couple of years due to ongoing restrictions placed on them in many places across the globe, one industry that has notably been thriving is the world of trading cards and collectibles. While demand began to skyrocket almost as soon as we were all forced inside in 2020, the trend reached an absolute fever pitch last year, especially when it came to collectible cards. Of course, with this increased demand came soaring prices, bringing with it many people looking to cash in on the frenzy. And as retailers were swarmed with people looking to scoop up as many of these items as possible, it didn't take long for an uglier side of the world of collectibles to come out. In May of last year, a customer at a Target store in Brookfield, Wisconsin, was walking to his car with sports cards he had just purchased when he was allegedly approached by 4 men who tried to rob him in the parking lot. He ended up drawing a gun on them and scaring them away without any injuries or shots fired. But the incident was still enough for the major US retailer to decide that it had had enough, and the in-store sale of MLB, NFL, NBA, and Pokemon cards was temporarily suspended. Similar stories have also emerged in other places, with card and memorabilia shops themselves becoming popular targets for robberies. Being that both Luke and I have been into collectibles at one point or another in our lives, we thought that the whole thing might make an interesting topic for a video. When we did some digging, it turned out there were quite a few serious crimes that have involved collectibles over the years, 2 of which we decided to cover in today's videos. Just a heads up, we'll be dedicating an entire video to each one of these cases, so make sure to check out the description below for the link to the second case. There are also definitely other stories like these that we came across, but that we didn't have time to get to today. So if you want us to cover those in a future video, be sure to let us know in the comments section below. While you're there, don't forget to like and subscribe to Crime Zone for more true crime content like this, making sure to hit the notification bell to stay up to date with our latest releases. With that out of the way, here are 2 dark crimes involving collectibles. On the afternoon of January 29th, 1992, a man named Lou Burke took his dog out for a walk in Putnam County, New York. The pair made their way down a secluded forest-lined street called Hortontown Hill Road, until Lou eventually decided to venture into the woods, presumably to let his dog take care of its business. However, as Lou approached a stream about 200 feet from the road, he made a startling discovery. It was the lifeless body of an adult man. When police were called about the body, they already had a good idea of who it could be. A 38-year-old neurologist named Daniel Pack had gone missing about 40 miles away in Westchester County more than 5 weeks earlier, under suspicious circumstances. Daniel had last been seen on December 20th, 1991, on what had started out as a normal day for the successful doctor. He had made the short drive to his office in the town of Greenburgh, where he had several appointments and was scheduled to finish up around 5. However, that evening, he was reported missing by his wife when he failed to return to the family home in Armonk for dinner. Daniel's abrupt disappearance was met with suspicion by both investigators and his family, who couldn't come up with any reason suggesting that he would have left behind his life willingly. Aside from being a successful neurologist with his own thriving practice, Daniel also had 2 young children, whom no one believed he would have abandoned. Things had only become more suspect when 11 days after his disappearance, Daniel's white 1990 Mitsubishi Eclipse was found abandoned near Route 17 in Paramus, New Jersey. This was roughly a 30-minute drive from his office, in a direction that he never would have traveled for work or anything else. Initially, this is where Daniel's trail went cold. That was, until Lou Burke decided to venture into the forest on that fateful January day in Putnam County. When the remains were recovered from the wooded area where they were found, they were soon formally identified as those of Daniel Pack. An autopsy revealed that his death had been caused by a single gunshot wound to the head, and that he had likely been dead for several weeks. A pair of Daniel's prescription glasses were also recovered at the scene, from which one of the lenses was missing. Despite all signs pointing to foul play, police were initially hesitant to publicly label Daniel's death a homicide, and shared few details about their investigation with the media. Aside from information about the discovery and identification of Daniel's body, there would be little to no news about the case for almost 4 months, until on May 19, 1992, when authorities abruptly announced that they had arrested and charged a suspect with Daniel's murder. That suspect was a 48-year-old man named Joseph Gordon Jr., who lived in the village of Elmsford, close to Daniel's office. Though the news of Gordon's arrest would likely have generated headlines no matter what, it was the alleged motive behind the crime that would soon capture the attention of many members of the public. According to investigators, the murder had been the result of a dispute over baseball cards. It turned out that Gordon was a dealer of sports cards who had owned a couple of different collectible card businesses in New York and Connecticut. At that time, he was working out of a leased space in the Sporting Life Amusement Center in Rockland County, New York, selling mostly baseball and hockey cards. Gordon had met Daniel in the spring of 1991 when he had sought treatment following a car accident. The two had apparently struck up a casual friendship during that time, and Gordon had convinced Daniel to invest some serious money with him into baseball cards, with the alleged promise that they would appreciate in value. Between March and December of 1991, detectives estimated that Daniel had invested roughly $70,000 in baseball cards from Gordon, with the understanding that he was purchasing rare collectibles. However, authorities stated that Gordon had instead given Daniel crates and crates of cards with no actual special value, pocketing the rest of his money. They theorized that on the day he disappeared, Daniel had gone to confront Gordon about being ripped off, and Gordon had murdered him in the basement of his home in Elmsford. This theory was only strengthened when 3 months later, in August of 1992, investigators announced that Gordon was also being charged with felony grand larceny in an unrelated case. According to a Mohegan Lake couple named John and Janice Beeler, in May of 1991, Gordon had convinced them to give him $15,000 to purchase stock in a new sports memorabilia company he was starting called Double Play Collectibles, Inc. The Beelers claimed that several months after they handed over the money, they discovered that Gordon's business venture was bogus, and that no company called Double Play Collectibles had been registered in the state of New York. Most disturbing of all, though, is what the Beelers told police had happened when they tried to get their investment back. After initially blowing them off for some time, Gordon had apparently offered to meet John Beeler alone at night in a secluded area of Putnam County to repay the money. John hadn't gone because his wife had convinced him not to. One final detail worth mentioning, and one that was of particular interest to investigators at the time, was where Gordon allegedly told the Beelers that he planned to open his fraudulent card shop. It was at a complex directly across the street from where Daniel Pack's abandoned car would later be found. When Gordon went to trial for the second-degree murder of Daniel Pack in January of 1993, the prosecution began by expanding on much of the information that had already made its way out to the public. A New Jersey sports memorabilia dealer named Al Rosen was brought in as an expert witness to evaluate the crates of baseball cards that Gordon had sold to Daniel throughout 1991. Like investigators, Rosen concluded that Daniel had been ripped off. He testified that despite spending $70,000 on the collection, Daniel's cards weren't worth more than $5,400. He further stated that all of the sets that Gordon had given Daniel were common and in large circulation, and none were more than 5 years old. A friend and former business partner of Gordon's, named Leslie Levine, testified that during the time that Gordon and Daniel were doing business together, Gordon had spent large sums of money on cars, gifts, and a trip to Atlantic City. Levine stated that she believed that this was money that Gordon had pocketed from Daniel instead of putting it towards the cards that he believed he was investing in. The sources we came across aren't clear if this was Levine or someone else, but at the trial, one of Gordon's friends also testified that she had followed Gordon to the place in New Jersey where Daniel's Mitsubishi was dropped off the day after his disappearance, and then proceeded to give Gordon a ride back to his home. The witness claimed that on the way, she had seen Gordon throw something out of the window, but she couldn't be sure what. Prosecutors alleged that the item in question was the murder weapon that had been used to kill Daniel Pack, which they had never been able to recover. To support this theory, they introduced another witness named Michael King, as well as several taped phone calls between him and Gordon. King was a Connecticut police officer who had met Gordon back in 1989, when he had sold him a handgun and some bullets for just over $400. King claimed that he and Gordon had become friends for a while, but that they had since drifted apart, and that he hadn't heard from him again until early 1992, when Gordon had called saying that he was in trouble with the police. During the phone calls, Gordon reportedly said that investigators were asking him questions about the murder of Daniel Pack. Though he claimed to have nothing to do with the crime, he wondered if King wouldn't mind coming up with some paperwork for him, stating that the gun he had purchased from him in 1989 had been destroyed. Gordon told King that he had gotten rid of the gun a while ago because his son was living with him and he didn't want weapons around, and this is when he had disposed of the weapon. After presenting tapes of the phone calls, prosecutors alleged that this was evidence of Gordon trying to fabricate a false story in order to make it seem like he wouldn't have had access to the alleged murder weapon. This was especially important, prosecutors argued, because .38 caliber bullets had been found during a search of Gordon's home, and this was believed to be the same caliber ammunition that had been used to kill Daniel Pack. With a credible explanation for why no murder weapon could be recovered, prosecutors turned their attention to more concrete pieces of evidence in the case. An expert on body fluids and DNA testified that blood found in Gordon's car matched the type and genetic makeup of Daniel Pack, suggesting that his vehicle had been used to transport the body. This was followed by evidence recovered from the alleged crime scene, Gordon's basement. During a search of the residence, investigators noticed that the floor of the basement had recently been repainted, and had also been treated with an acid that was allegedly used to destroy any potential evidence. An empty bottle of the acid was found at the scene. Fragments were also recovered from the basement, which an expert witness for the prosecution testified were the broken pieces of the missing lens of Daniel's glasses. Though the evidence against Gordon was quickly mounting, his defense team would soon throw a curveball that would surprise everyone. It started when prosecutors put Gordon's 17-year-old son Chad on the witness stand after he agreed to testify against his father. Up until this point, the defense had been stating that by the end of the trial, they would lay out an alternate theory of the case. This was the moment that theory would come out in full force. During his cross-examination of Chad, Gordon's lawyer, William Kunstler, flat out accused him of being Daniel's real killer. In a dramatic line of questioning, Kunstler implored Chad to tell the truth, reducing the 17-year-old to tears on the witness stand as he repeatedly denied the accusations. The defense theorized that Chad had been the one that had been responsible for Daniel's death following some sort of sexual encounter between them. Based on the sources we read, it appears that two different versions of this theory may have been presented at trial. One in which Chad killed Daniel at the end of some sort of illicit relationship, and one in which Chad had killed Daniel after he had been assaulted against his will. To support their theory, the defense brought up a piece of evidence that had previously been undisclosed to the public. During Daniel's autopsy, a small amount of semen had been recovered from his mouth. Though the amount was reportedly too small for investigators to test given the limitations of the technology at the time, Gordon's defense team hoped that the evidence would help to support their theory by lending credibility to their story of Chad's involvement. With this evidence in hand, the defense told Gordon's version of what happened on December 20th, 1991. According to them, at 2:30 p.m. that day, Gordon had picked up Chad from his high school in Rockland County and had dropped him off at their home in Elmsford. Before leaving, he had given Chad some cash and cards to hand over to Daniel, who would be arriving there a short time later. Upon returning to his collectibles store back in Rockland County, Gordon allegedly noticed he had several frantic messages from his son, who was incoherent. He returned home once again to find that Chad had murdered Daniel. The defense argued that the reason it appeared Gordon had been so involved in the case was because he had been, but only after the murder had already been committed, that his participation had only consisted of covering up the crime to stop his son from going to prison. Though the prosecution was never able to adequately explain the semen evidence found in Daniel's mouth, they insisted that this was not crucial to their case and was likely irrelevant. Instead, their final point of attack was focused on the defense's timeline of the case. Gordon claimed to have picked up Chad at 2:30 p.m., dropped him off at home, and then returned to his card shop in Rockland County before receiving his calls for help. Prosecutors claimed that this trip easily would have taken Gordon 45 minutes. There was just one problem. A call had been placed from his card shop at 3:02 p.m. on the day of the murder. Since the earliest that Gordon could have arrived back from dropping Chad off was almost 15 minutes after this call had been made, prosecutors argued that the defense's theory of the case was not possible. Chad's testimony, meanwhile, had reportedly been totally consistent with the timeline. Instead of dropping him off at home, he claimed that his father had dropped him off at the card shop to watch it for a couple of hours while he went out. Chad claimed that his father didn't return until well after 6 p.m. that day, a window in which prosecutors alleged Gordon would have had ample time to commit the murder. After deliberating for 6 hours over 2 days, the jury ultimately sided with the prosecution, and on February 9th, 1993, Joseph Gordon Jr. was convicted of the murder of Daniel Pack. In interviews with local newspapers after the verdict, jurors stated that the evidence about the telephone call that conflicted with the defense's version of the case was crucial to their decision. A month later, Gordon was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. Though this would normally be where we would wrap things up, we're guessing that more than a few of you are still wondering about that unknown semen evidence found with Daniel's body, and rightfully so. In the years after his sentencing, Gordon tried unsuccessfully for years to get the sample tested, arguing that it was potentially exculpatory evidence. Finally, with the help of the Innocence Project, the sample was tested. At first, it reportedly produced inconclusive results, but in 2015, it was found that the sample wasn't a match to Gordon or his son Chad. Experts also allege that the sample could not have been deposited after Daniel's death. Unfortunately, this baffling development provides more questions than answers. It's possible, for instance, that neither Gordon or Chad participated in the murder. However, the semen sample alone doesn't seem to provide a realistic explanation for why there is so much evidence in the case that seems to point to Gordon's involvement in particular. It also doesn't explain why, to this day, Gordon continues to maintain that his son was responsible for the killing, and that he was covering up the crime. This is especially bizarre when you consider that Gordon's unwillingness to change his story may be the only thing now keeping him in prison. According to a December 2021 article in the New York Times, Gordon has been eligible for parole since 2018, but has been denied several times now because he refuses to take responsibility for Daniel's murder. In short, it's possible that an innocent man was convicted of this crime. But the truth is, considering the credible evidence against him, we just don't know. As far as the official record is concerned, however, Joseph Gordon Jr. is guilty, and most, including Daniel Pack's family, consider the case a settled matter. At 78 years old, it's unclear if Gordon will continue to fight his conviction, or whether any new information that could definitively affirm or disprove this case will ever come to light. Do you know of any other cases like this that you think we should check out? Tell us about them in the comments section below. As always, if you enjoyed our video, don't forget to like and subscribe to Crime Zone for more true crime content like this, making sure to hit the notification bell to stay up to date with our latest releases. Thank you for watching.